Hey FFR listeners, did you know that if you join our Patreon community, you can get nifty perks like early access, exclusive weekly bonus segments, access to our friendly Discord, and more? That's right, you can get cool stuff and help us keep doing FFR at the same time. What are you waiting for? Go to patreon.com/femfreak.
I think that the space of this record store is a great space to have a conversation around like the death of the artist or can you support artists who have done harm? And so they're trying to have this conversation, but it just the whole time I was like, oh boy. Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by a woman who will gladly regale you with her all-time top 5 Peter Gabriel tracks, and I know this for a fact. Carolyn Pettit.
Number 1, probably In Your Eyes, but definitely not the album version of In Your Eyes. The 12-minute version recorded live in Athens in 1987.
Fun fact about Carolyn is she could do this all day with anything out of the 80s, but nothing contemporary. We also have special guest Nicole He, who is a game developer and creative technologist. Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
This week, we'll be talking about the Hulu series High Fidelity, which puts a new spin on the classic tale of music-obsessed romance and heartbreak. Okay, Nicole, what is a creative technologist?
That's a good question. I don't actually know the answer, even though I use those words to describe myself sometimes, depending on who I'm talking to.
I'll tell you.
Okay,
I'll tell you what it
tell
means.
me. Please tell me.
It means that you make some of the coolest shit I've ever seen.
Wow, thank you so much.
I'm going to let you describe it, but it's always it's very cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Maybe one way to describe what a creative technologist does is that we make technology things that aren't about making money from technology, which is probably rare. But yeah, I guess I basically I make games, which is actually a relatively new development for me, but I like to make weird tech art stuff. And so, so I'm working on a lot of things that are like usually using sort of like strange inputs. For example, I do a lot of work with voice technology, which basically means just like yelling at your computer. So I made a game called Enhance.computer, which is also the URL of the game. And basically it lets you live out your cyberpunk fantasies. It's an homage to that trope where in, sci-fi movies or like police shows where people are standing in front of a screen screaming enhance and zoom in. So it's a game that lets you do that.
It's amazing. Wasn't there a video of I remember when I saw you show this game at XOXO a couple years ago, there was a video of a guy who couldn't make it work.
Oh yeah, it was incredible. So I found a few Let's Play videos and there was one guy, I don't know where he was from, but he was speaking Spanish and basically he just could not get the speech recognition to recognize a single word that he was saying. So he was just trying to say enhance over and over while smoking a cigarette. And it like absolutely did not work. Like it would say like, it'd pick up like, let's hang or something. And it just ends with him screaming, fuck you.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing. Yeah.
We'll link some of those. You all should check this out. It's so delightful. And anyone that knows anything is like, this isn't real. This enhance function is not real. And so it's so funny to like create a game around this super fake thing.
Yeah.
That we've all seen a million times. You know?
I think like also because I'm interested in our expectations of technology, usually as informed by science fiction, and the difference between that and how technology actually works. So Enhance.computer is actually, I would say, more of an art project than a real video game because it sort of showcases the differences, again, between
Don't be policing the borders of what video games are.
No, I know. I don't want to undermine all the work we've done in the last decade about allowing everything to be video games.
Right. Okay, so now tell us about how you became best friends with Billie Eilish.
Oh, God. Yeah. So I did a project recently with Vogue magazine where I trained a neural network on a lot of interview questions and also on Billie Eilish lyrics. So it would generate questions to ask her, and it also generated its own Billie Eilish-esque lyrics. And yeah, I did a video where the AI essentially asked her these questions, and then also, we had her read the Billie Eilish lyrics that the AI generated and have her give her thoughts about that. And yeah, it's nuts. I mean, she is just like a huge star, and the video has like an insane number of views. But I think what was like super interesting about that is that it was like she took it very seriously and was really open about answering the questions, which were kind of bizarre. Like, who consumed all of your power in one go, I think was one of the questions. And she sort of answered it seriously. And I think one thing that was interesting about her experience, as she said in the video, is just like when human interviewers interview her, they always ask the same questions over and over. And it always is like they're trying to get something from her. They're trying to get her to say something that will like be controversial, or just like get a lot of readers or viewers or something like that. But she felt like with the AI, it didn't have its own agenda. It was like she was basically saying it was like unbiased, which is an unusual thing to say about an AI. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Huh. So interesting. What a weird life you have. I love it. Carolyn?
Yeah.
How's your weird life?
I not remotely as interesting as that. So
You're not best friends with Billie Eilish? God, get off my podcast. All right. Well, speaking of big stars and music, let's get into what we're here to talk about. So, though it originated as a novel by Nick Hornby, most probably know High Fidelity from the 2000 film, which starred John Cusack as Rob Gordon, a record store owner and obsessive music fan who takes us through his all-time top 5 most painful breakups while trying to reunite with his most recent girlfriend. Many consider High Fidelity to be the definitive look at a particular kind of masculinity, so it's pretty surprising that the new Hulu TV series swaps out the white guy version of Rob for none other than the extremely attractive Zoe Kravitz.
Yeah.
Despite this significant shift, a great deal of High Fidelity will be extremely familiar to those who have seen the film. Major plot points and moments are repeated almost exactly as they were in previous versions, gender swapping aside. So the new High Fidelity raises a number of interesting questions, such as, is it possible to just swap out the main character for a woman in a story that many consider to be about masculinity, and to end up with something worthwhile and insightful in its own right? I was fucking obsessed with this movie when it came out. Mm-hmm. I'd probably seen this movie like a dozen times. And then I got older and I became a feminist media critic. And I was like, this movie is trash and it's about a stalker and it's fucked up. So when I heard that they were making a TV show, I was like appalled. And it got me thinking as I was watching it, like, okay, y'all, we have all of these gender swap remakes. Like, how much longer are we going to do this? And when is the gender swap remake, like, not a gimmick and actually, like, worthwhile?
Right. Yeah, but so for me, this is, just to stipulate, I think both of you have seen all the episodes. I have only seen the first 4 episodes. So just with that caveat, for me, this show is very worthwhile, and I'll tell you specifically why, because for me, there's a very specific reason. I think that media has always, or, traditionally, very much allowed male obsession and normalized like male obsession and male obsessives. Male characters can be obsessed about music or a woman or whatever, and it can be and often is framed in a positive light. Whereas female obsession, typically very often goes to fatal attraction. Female obsession is framed as inherently like unbalanced, as dangerous, and all of those kinds of things. And so for me, as a woman who absolutely obsessed over what is the perfect closer for this mixtape that I want to make to communicate to someone how I feel about them, and who absolutely can experience powerful negative emotions like jealousy. There's a moment in the High Fidelity film, right, where John Cusack says of his ex's new boyfriend, just simmering over with rage. What fucking Ian guy? And we get that moment here with Zoe Kravitz saying, what fucking Lily girl? And like, yeah, it's fucked up, etc. But I'm also like, I know that kind of jealousy, and I felt it. And it's like, it's not presented inherently, in my view anyway, as like, as the way female obsession so often is. It's like, we're supposed to like, we're supposed to like understand Rob and be like, hey, we all have those fucked up feelings sometimes. And so in that regard, I really appreciated, even as much as I wish, like, why does it have to just be like swapping out like a woman for a man in a familiar story, and we need these kinds of stories that are original and etc. Like, I still feel like there's something valuable about what this is doing with regard to portraying a woman who can be obsessed about music and be obsessed about the people who have broken her heart and all of those things, and it's not like totally pathologized the way female obsession so often is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's not a pure like gender swap only change, right? I mean, I think the characters are actually very different. So I agree. I enjoyed seeing her have that same obsessiveness and have like the space to have that obsessiveness and to sort of maintain the authority of being extremely knowledgeable about music that the original Rob also had. And so she got to keep that kind of authority on the subject that she cares so much about. But I think there are a lot of differences between the characters. Like, I found that her character was a lot less of an asshole than the original. And I was wondering if that was by design, because I feel like part of the whole thing about the movie is that like, oh yeah, this guy's a huge dick. Like, he's a real asshole. He treats women like garbage. And a lot of it was, I felt like, by nature of him being a straight guy, the movie was also about like the relationship between men and women. So one thing that's sort of different about this is that she is queer, because at least one of her exes is a woman. So that also changes the topic. It's not only about relationships between men and women, but I also found her to be a more nuanced character that had a lot more like relatability. And part of that probably is also because it was like, this whole thing was filmed and takes place like in my neighborhood, like a block away from where I live. Like, when they get brunch, it's like where I get brunch. And I thought it was funny, like, there's a scene where Clyde is like picking up his dry cleaning. That's my dry cleaner. And so, I mean, that's part of why, it's relatable to me personally, also probably demographically. So I just, I think for that reason, probably other reasons, I found the character a lot more relatable. But I think part of it is because she is actually presented as a more nuanced and well-rounded character than the original Rob.
Yeah, I mean, this was made 20 years later. And so I think that the way that I think that so much has changed in our media landscape that I would be shocked if they didn't make some changes in that regard, at least. I really hated this the first couple episodes. And then I just binged the whole thing. So I clearly kept watching it. And I probably would have watched it whether we were recording this or not. But I struggled a lot with like, I don't know if I'm the audience. Like, I don't know who the audience is for this, because it's literally this changes towards the end of the series, but it's like, it's the fucking movie. Like, while there are changes in how they present Rob, it's like the same characters, the same dialogue, the same names, the same situations. Like, everything about her ex-girlfriend is literally, other than the fact that they like make fun of influencers as the version of the socialite from 20 years ago is now like the influencer socialite. Like, the same fucking everything, right? And I was having these really awkward flashbacks where I was feeling uncomfortable because I'm like, I've already seen this. Why am I seeing this again? But if it's for a new audience, for a younger generation, then like maybe that doesn't matter.
Right. I mean, aren't these all of these things are still relevant, right? I mean, there are definitely music nerds of all genders are still constantly being born and groomed in the too cool, vinyl shops of America, or whatever. Like I mean, and I think that reimagining Rob in the way this does, like as similar as everything else might be, somehow that does like fundamentally change things. I mean, again, to go back to what I said earlier, like my relationship as a viewer who is a woman, like I'm the audience. I guess I'm the audience or I'm part of the audience because I feel so validated by this in a way that I never would and never have by the John Cusack film, because when I watch the John Cusack film, I'm like, yeah, I relate to all that, but it's like, but that is all okay for dudes. But here I'm like, oh, I have all these facets to my personality too, and here is finally like a piece of media that's like telling me that those things are not, because High Fidelity is, I think, so often considered a film that's insightful about masculinity. There's like this way that those character traits then become almost essentialized as like inherently masculine, and so to have Rob in this, Zoe Kravitz, possess a lot of those character traits, it kind of frees them from that. It liberates them for me and makes me, feel better, about like being a woman who has opinions about like what are the best deep cut album tracks on Guided by Voices albums, or whatever. Like I can hang in those conversations, and I enjoy hanging in those conversations and all that. But like typically media has not been kind to or even like acknowledge the existence of women who operate in that mold.
I think the original Rob felt more of an archetype of a type of character, because like you can imagine him as sort of him and the two friends or employees in the record store as sort of these guys who are probably like nerds who were bullied as children and threw themselves into music and ended up becoming outcast freaks who are really obsessive about something like that. That is sort of I feel like we know, like everybody knows people that are kind of like that, and I think it's harder to imagine women like that, I think, because it is also I don't know, like less allowed for girls to be experts in this way, or like not allowed to be eccentric in the same way that the John Cusack and the other dudes were in the original movie. And so I what I liked about the Zoe Kravitz character is that she felt like, not like that kind of archetype of person that I could imagine in real life, or seeing sort of a cartoonish representation of, as in the original movie.
I totally agree with both of you, but I did not pick up on all of that when I was watching this show. Like you're saying all this and I'm like, yeah, totally. But I was so annoyed. Like I was annoyed at the direct address to the camera. I was like, why are you doing this? This doesn't work. This is annoying. Like also, why are we acting like Zoe Kravitz isn't one of the most beautiful humans on the planet?
I know. That's like one of the things where it's like John Cusack is playing this sort of like average guy, probably like oppressed nerd or whatever, and like Zoe Kravitz is like probably one of the most beautiful women who like walks on this earth. And I was curious how they would actually approach that.
Which fun fact, the woman that plays Marie DeSalle, which is the sort of love interest of Rob, is Lisa Bonet, which is Zoe Kravitz's mother, who is also one of the most beautiful women.
Right, and they look so similar, actually. They look very similar. So it's kind of funny how different. Obviously, they're not playing the same person, but they're like Lisa Bonet is this like sort of almost like mythically beautiful, ethereal, exotic woman, and Zoe Kravitz, who looks exactly like her, is like not is like
and they
Rob.
They also, I feel like the costume design for Zoe, for the character of Rob in this was very like, it was weird because she like when she was down and dumpy and sad and whatever, she's wearing this like, ugly jacket, quote unquote, and like these like, she's wearing it. They're fashionable like too big jeans. And she's like, kind of like quote unquote punk. But then when you have these flashbacks or these moments where she goes to parties, she's wearing these like cutesy, like really girly dresses, which I'm like, this character that is like music obsessed, that runs a record shop, like even when she's super happy, wouldn't, like, I can't imagine her dressing like that. I feel like there's a lot of shit that they did with her character that didn't make sense to me, even though I really I eventually grew to enjoy her, and like I liked the arc that they took her through. I liked watching her, like, spoilers, she like, finds a really, really nice guy and she treats him like shit. Right. And like it's her kind of arc of realizing that she can't like push people away and do all these shitty things and then like actually get them in the end. And I think that part of it is relatable to me in some ways, of like they allowed her to have this arc. They allowed this complexity with her ex and the like complicatedness of like meeting your ex's new partner and like, excuse me, all of that stuff. But I do think there's some confusion about like, at the core, who is this person?
Yeah, I think that for me, the scenes. So, like, I watched the movie for the first time the day before I like binged all these episodes. So I think that might be why it was like so fresh in my mind. And as I was watching the TV show, I like couldn't help but constantly compare it to the movie. But I think for me, the scenes where she's repeating the lines that are word for word verbatim from the movie, some of those scenes are the ones that felt the most out of character for the Rob that I felt like they were trying to create, because the original Rob, again, I think was a more clear-cut asshole, and like the Zoe Kravitz Rob, yeah, like has her flaws and makes bad choices and does bad things, but I think is a lot more sympathetic. And so there were some scenes that just didn't land as well, or like some lines, like the one where I think in one of the early episodes, she meets with the ex that is like a stand-up comic, and then he's like telling her about like his struggles with his baby or whatever, and she's like, and there's that line that's from the original movie where it's like, oh, thank God, like I broke up with him. Like he didn't break up with me. And in the original, it was the same thing where the other person was like talking about the troubles they were going through, and Rob is just like ignoring them and just like selfishly talking about why they're, happy that actually, like the only thing they're caring about is that like they realize that they actually dumped that other person. I feel like that didn't land as well, because it's just like she was not as much of an asshole as the original Rob. So we're in the movie, that scene to me was like, oh yeah, this guy, like what an asshole. But in this one, it felt a little bit out of character because they're making her a little bit more sympathetic. I don't know. Yeah. That's how I feel about her.
I think there are a couple of smaller sort of like political things that they try to interject in this show that I think is worth us talking about. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it felt really out of place. And I think I know I've definitely addressed this on the podcast where I'm like, sometimes when programming is really trying to make a point or like position themselves with certain value systems, like it can feel so forced as opposed to it being done really naturally. So when they're in the second episode, they're arguing about whether they should sell a Michael Jackson album or not. and I was like, cool, I'm here for this conversation, but this feels so contrived. And the parameters around, or the situation around it, is that like, I think that the space of this record store is a great space to have a conversation around like the death of the artist, or can you support artists who have done harm? And so they're trying to have this conversation, but it just, the whole time I was like, oh boy, like I was like, here we go. We're having a lecturing moment. And so they're talking about whether you can sell it or not. And at one point Rob says to Charisse, but you still listen to a rapper in a MAGA hat, talking about Kanye West. And then on top of all of this, which I'm already kind of rolling my eyes about, even though I still think it's a good thing. It's just, I don't like how they do it. They have a white woman standing at the counter where every time they say Michael Jackson is a child molester, she says allegedly. And I'm like, is that funny? Are you like trying to say something about white women? Are you trying to say something about like, I don't know what, like, I feel like it was supposed to be we're supposed to write her off, but it's just the whole thing felt really forced to me in a way that didn't feel natural, which was unfortunate because I think that is one of the upgrades, right? Of like, how do we make this space more contemporary? And how do we make these conversations more contemporary?
I think one of my main takeaways from watching the show is that they obviously made the conscious decision to gender swap and to have a lot more people of color and to make it queer.
I mean, a little bit. Let's say a little bit queer. Like,
yeah. I mean, a lot more than the original, right? And so, but there's very little actual discussion about any of those topics. And it's not that, like, I feel like every, movie or TV show that has Black people has to be, like, talking about race or something like that. But because this is changing an original text to something different in that direction and very consciously, there was not a lot about that. Again, I don't, it's not like I feel like they definitely should have or something, but, I think it's interesting that, like, Rob and Mac are people of color, and then, like, their new partners are white, and, like, it's not a thing that's ever talked about.
Yeah, it feels like a gender and race swap without doing the actual effort of acknowledging that.
But it's interesting because they do
the way people exist in the world.
Yeah, they do talk about it like slightly on the surface level, where like Clyde is extremely white and he makes fun of himself for that when she's like, oh, he likes fish, and he's like, yeah, like, haven't you noticed that I'm white? But that feels like sort of the extent of it. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that because, again, it's not like I feel like they have to go into it necessarily, because in some ways not going into it makes it feel sort of realistic or something, or I don't know. It's like not trying to like lecture you about something, but yeah.
Well, I mean, like Charisse being a Black woman, they don't ever really address that. And I think that her particular position and what she's trying to do and who she is as a character, like her race is very relevant. And that's not addressed. Yeah. Like there's one moment where a guy walks in and sees who put up the request for like, bandmates or whatever. Yep. But that like, it was very implicit. Yeah. Like that to me was a moment that was like sort of the most like race addressing moment, but it was also implicit. Like it wasn't like necessarily about race, but it felt like it was, and it was very sad. Yeah.
I have to say, though, as far as Charisse goes, so like Charisse is obviously a replacement for the character played in the original film by Jack Black. And that was like a star-making performance, like an early Jack Black performance where like most people, I think when Jack Black at the end of that film starts singing Let's Get It On, it was like, holy shit, who is this guy? This guy is like fucking incredible. And like, I was
waiting for that moment in this film, too. And it didn't happen. I mean, it did, but not in the same way.
Like, right. And I think like, so it'll be interesting to see if, because it hasn't been greenlit for season 2 yet, but if season 2 happens, it'll be fascinating on so many levels, not least of which it'll have to chart out some new territory. It can't keep relying on the storyline from the film. So that'll be really interesting to see. But also, we'll definitely get more of Charisse's storyline. But I just want to say, so when Charisse shows up, and because I have in my mind, like, that larger-than-life Jack Black performance, instantly, I think her name is Divine Joy Randolph, like, takes this role and absolutely makes it her own, and like just knocked my fucking socks off from like the very first moment when she's in the store and Simon starts playing his song or whatever, and she's just like, I don't fucking care or whatever. Like just the way that she even says like the first line out of her mouth, I was like, wow. And just, she never stopped just absolutely astounding me. Like, she is far and away my favorite thing about this show. I fucking love her.
Yeah, I love her too. And I was sort of like, so I guess, Carolyn, you didn't see the later episodes, but there was one episode that was actually Simon's top 5 breakups. Yeah.
I've heard about that. I read about it, right? And it's
I love
really,
that.
I love that episode, but I was like, why didn't Charisse get one?
Yeah, and so what I read, I did glance at an article where I don't know if it was the showrunner, like who exactly was making these comments, but somebody who's like involved in the show was saying, yes, like it's definitely a conscious thing where, we did give Simon his own episode here, and if, the stars align and we get to do season 2, we definitely want to give Charisse like her own space to explore that. And obviously that can sound kind of like a little underwhelming. Like, why does the white guy get the priority in the first season and not, but nonetheless, like, we can hope that we will get to see Charisse get more fleshed out. Like, I mean,
that sounds like a bullshit excuse.
I agree.
Yeah.
And yet, but God, when she puts like all of her influences on that, because Simon tells her, like, you have to be more specific. And it's just the most like eclectic and exciting and like specific, like, oh, like this album, but like only whatever these songs, and like, it's like this instrument from this, whatever. And it's like, oh, it's so good. It is like, I was in like music nerd heaven, like thinking about this person whose musical tastes are just so fascinating and like eclectic and like core to who they are as a person, and and who just is so unapologetic about all of it.
In relation to some of the like politics stuff that I think the show is bringing in, there was one thing that happened in episode 3 that I was disappointed with. So there is a scene with, I think it's Simon and Rob had found out about Lily, the fiance, and Simon is trying to be the comforting friend and is like, yeah, she's a dumb cunt. And he's like, oh, that felt awful.
That felt awful.
And then she's like, yeah, she's a stupid whore. And they're both like, oh, that's not right. And I loved that, actually, because I was like, that is such a smooth way to be like, the way that we bring down women and the gendered language we use, and you're like, you don't even know who she is, and you're calling her all of these awful things, like, and both of them being like, oh, that doesn't feel right, even though I'm angry and I don't like her irrationally and all this shit, right? I really, really liked that. But later in the same episode, she calls Lily a fucking bitch, and they don't correct it. They like let it roll. And I'm like, but you did all of this work to show why that's a, like this really lovely integrated work to show why that's a problem. And then you just like let it go. Like you just actually did the thing that you just said wasn't okay. So
I wonder if that has to do with the Rob is supposed to be an asshole angle. And, she is, especially more towards the end, I would say. I feel like that was part of the thing, again, about the original, where like he was clearly an asshole and misogynist who like did not see women as people, really. And we don't have that as much with her. Again, I think because she's a more complicated, more nuanced character, in some ways it sort of like makes me, I think that's good, but I think it's also like, because the original Rob was so much more of a clear bad guy, and they decided to not do that as much for her. I think it just makes it, her character a little bit more inconsistent or something, or like, I think it was like, with the original, you're sort of like more clearly like whatever he says something bad, you're like, oh yeah, that's bad. But with her, it's less clear, right?
But in context, 20 years ago, I don't think people actually thought like Rob was just being a dude. It wasn't that's a problem. So like your perspective of watching it in 2020 is very different than how everyone interpreted it at the time. There's a bit in episode 5 that I just wanted to address because I loved it. There is a woman, I forget who she's played by, but it's wonderful, where she is like this rich artist and she's like, my life's work is to create art out of my personal tragedies, which is 100% making fun of like artists. And it was just delightful, and she was over the top, and she was trying to sell off her cheating husband's amazing record collection, just like the most precious, hard to get vinyls that you could find. And she's like, and so there's this tension because Rob's like, oh my God, I know is he an asshole? I don't know. I can't take all of this for no money. Da, 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 da. So they go on this, like, Rob and Clyde go on this quest to like see the dude and to see if he's actually a dick, and they meet him and they engage with him, and he's such a piece of shit. And when Rob walks out of there, she says that was like being in a Michael Bay movie. And it was just kudos to whoever came up with that, because it was so perfect. Like that jab was perfect, and it was very, the whole thing was super
that was one of my favorite episodes also, because it's interesting because like, okay, so that asshole husband character I think is the most like cartoonishly bad character in the whole series.
For sure,
and he's also the most like the original Rob character, right? Like you can imagine if that Rob somehow grew up and became rich or something, like he would be that guy who's like incredibly snobby about music, but he's rich, so I guess that's the difference. And he talks over women. But what's interesting is her choice in that episode actually to empathize with him, even though she hated him, because he said, music saved my life. And she's like, well, music has saved my life. And so, and I think it would have been, I think that was an interesting choice, because it was like she could have just done, gone with it, basically stolen his record collection and essentially disavowed that character who is the most like the original Rob character.
I was like, that's a weird fucking choice that they made.
But she didn't. She felt empathy for that character, and I think that is one of those things that made her a more complex character than the original as well. Yeah.
Although I do I don't know. I mean, I kind of get the decision, but I also feel a little weird about. I was just like, he's such a dick. Just take his shit. It's like,
right.
But I think that I'm curious if it does go into season 2, if they are able to actually allow her to continue progressing, or if it's going to reset. Because at the very end, the whole season is about how Rob is selfish. The whole season, everyone is telling her that she's selfish. And then she does a thing that's not selfish. It's a small thing, but it's not a small thing, but it's a small thing, right? So like, I feel like these shows have a tendency to just repeat themselves as opposed to actually letting, like, what is the next thing that she needs to work on, right? Or like, what does it mean for her to struggle with this particular issue, and what does that look like into the next season and stuff? And also her fucking a teenager. I totally forgot about that. I didn't note any of that because I put it out of my mind. And that whole thing, I was just like, no, what are you? And the jokes about him being a toddler, it was a lot. And like totally makes sense. And now that I think about it, that's the character that Lisa Bonet played.
Was.
Yeah. in the original movie. Well, on that note, go watch the new High Fidelity.
There's one thing I want to talk about, which is the sort of technology angle, I guess, or like, because this is a remake of a show from 20 years ago. And what's interesting is I feel like, vinyl or record shops have the same sort of like cultural cachet, but a lot of things have changed since then. And a lot of the premise of the original is just like wondering what your exes are up to, which is like not a thing that happens anymore because we have social media. So you know exactly what your exes are up to. And I was curious about how they would approach that, because social media has totally changed how people relate to other people overall, but especially their exes.
And they did that a little bit with the fiance and looking at her Instagram, but it was it was pretty minor.
Right. Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I guess it's like it makes sense that Rob is sort of like a Luddite kind of person who doesn't seem to like be super knowledgeable about
She made a Spotify playlist.
technology.
That's the
right.
weird thing for me as a veteran mixtape maker, like having to accept that like the closest thing we have now to mixtapes are Spotify playlists, which are I guess the closest thing we have to an equivalent now, but also are different in some very fundamental ways.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
like, in so the Simon episode, he makes an actual mixtape for this guy at the coffee shop that I walk by every day. But like, and that felt a lot more romantic, I think, because it's like, who the fuck makes mixtapes these days? It'd be so hard. Also, like, literally, how's this guy gonna actually listen to it? But
and I feel like too, because they named the episode "Warm and Weird" because he described cassette players and tapes as warm and weird, or weird and warm, and I really liked that. Like, it's a little hipstery and it's a little goofy, but I was like, yeah, I get why you would describe it as that. I thought that was kind of sweet.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a High Fidelity remake without some acknowledgement of mixtapes, right?
Right.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. When we come back, we will we'll have some freakouts.
Hey friends, Carolyn here. If you enjoy listening in on our conversations each week about what's happening in the world of media and pop culture and how that impacts our larger culture, please head on over to patreon.com/femfreak and help us keep bringing FFR to you.
What's your freak out?
Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Carolyn, you want to get us started?
Sure. I am currently freaking out about an essay being published on the website tevisthompson.com. So folks may know the writer and critic Tevis Thompson. He was on an earlier episode of FFR. He talked to Ebony and I about episode 3, I think, of Life is Strange 2. So, a friend of mine and friend of the show. But currently he's writing an essay, or the final part, really, of an essay. But he is writing about the game Fortnite. And he is posting an update to the essay every day. It will continue to update every day until it's finished. It won't go on forever, but it is sort of a thing that is happening right now. So you can check it out. And I just think it is such an exciting and insightful piece of criticism because, I think that Tevis, as a critic, does what a lot of great criticism does, and it argues from a very specific and very subjective point of view. It doesn't ask to be agreed with. It's not, the value is not necessarily in agreement. The value is in fully engaging with a perspective other than your own and having your own perspective potentially challenged or broadened or enriched by coming up against another perspective that's fiercely argued for. However, having said that, I do agree with a lot of what Tevis is saying about Fortnite specifically. I loved Fortnite for a while, for a few years. I think that a lot of what made it so fantastic has now been lost. But I didn't see much writing that acknowledged, even though Fortnite was this massive global, cultural phenomenon, I saw very little writing about it that actually engaged in any way with the things about Fortnite that I thought actually made it truly magical and exhilarating and special. And I think that Tevis's essay is getting at those qualities of Fortnite that truly did make it an extraordinary game for a while. So in my view, it's an extraordinary piece of writing about an extraordinary game, and you can find it, again, on his website at tevisthompson.com. The essay in progress is called It's Not Coming Back.
Nice. We'll definitely link that in the show notes so you can go take a look. Nicole, what are you freaking out about this week?
Okay, so this is something I guess I'm freaking out about not just this week, but my whole life. Well, not my whole life, probably the last few years. This is not related to media, but I would just like to take this opportunity to say that I think women, I mean, I think everybody, but I think women in particular should lift weights. And not just, I'm not talking about like doing, 5-pound dumbbell kind of weights. Like, I think women in particular should be lifting heavy weights, like your own body weight, or actually probably a lot more than that. I, like a lot of women, it felt like, oh, I'm capable of doing anything a man can do, but except for some reason, things that come to like physical activity. So, it's like, it's when I was learning how to knit, for example, I didn't think of myself as inherently bad at knitting, even though I probably was. It was just more like something that I could learn how to do. And I think strength is the same kind of thing, that women don't think of themselves that way. I feel like I hear a lot of women who think of themselves as like intellectually capable as men, for example, find that they still think of themselves as like physically less capable than men. And I just want to say that that's not true. And I think women should take up lifting heavy weights. Like I, for some reason, when I was younger, felt like, I would say things like, oh, I have no upper body strength or something like that. And I feel like I hear women say things like that. But it's just like any other skill, like knitting or cooking. It's like the kind of thing that the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And maybe I'm not like a world-class level knitter in my genetics in the same way that I'm not necessarily world-class level power lifter in my genetics, but it doesn't mean that I can't actually become strong or good at knitting just by doing it. So it's something I feel like any opportunity I get to talk to anybody, but women in particular, I think that I like to tell people that they should take it up because they're stronger than they think they are. And a lot of it, I think, is just like, the ways that you can actually do this is by probably visiting your local powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting sport gyms and signing up for beginner classes and things like that, where someone can teach you how to do these things. And you can probably lift a lot more weight than you think you can. So that's
Nice.
That's it.
I love that. I also love weightlifting. I don't do it, and I don't do it nearly enough, but I enjoy watching you do it on Instagram. And then I'm like, God, I should do that again. And then I don't, so it's fine. But yeah, I totally second that because so fun.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my freak out. So I did a thing that I never do, which is I bought a book in an airport. I literally don't think I've ever bought a book in an airport before.
I didn't think you liked John Grisham.
I know, exactly.
No,
So I was in this situation where I was reading a physical book, which I don't do very often, but it was given to me by the author, which, humble brag, whatever. And so I finished the book, and then I was freaking out about not having another book because I read like every night before I go to sleep. And so if I don't have a book on deck, I start getting really anxious. So I was like, and I forgot my Kindle. So I was like, cool, I'm going to buy a book at the airport. That's what people do. People always talk about doing this. And then I got to the airport and I was like, how do you buy a book at an airport? I didn't do my research about what I want to read next. Anyways, so I bought this book. It has a beautiful cover and it's called The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls. And I was like, okay, well, that's what I'm buying now because, like, what a great title and what a great cover. It is by Anissa Gray. Now, I wouldn't freak out about it other than the fact that I don't have another freak out. So it is not like my high raving, like dear listeners, you know that when I give you book recommendations, they're like legit for real. I am not steering you wrong. This is not on that high level. If it is a topic that you are interested in, then you would probably enjoy it. But I'm not like raving about it. I know that sounds terrible. I don't. I feel very strongly about my book recommendations. So, anyways, the book is about a Black family, and the husband and wife go to jail. They're arrested and go to jail, and it is about the fallout of that situation. It's about the relationships between the siblings, the children of the couple who were arrested, and all that ensues. And so it's backstory. It is, like shit that happened in the past. It's what's happening currently. It's the relationships like that the mom has with her kids and and all of that. And so it goes into issues of family trauma, abuse, eating disordered eating. There's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening. And it is told from the perspective of the three sisters. So the woman who goes to jail and her two sisters and their different relationships. Check it out if that sounds like something that would be of interest to you. Like, it's a very well written book, and it has a beautiful cover. So there you go. The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls by Anissa Gray. You can submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the freaking after party, which is only available to backers of this podcast. You can learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. Nicole, will you join us for the after party?
Yes, definitely.
Wicked. For our listeners who want to learn more about your creative technologing and your game and your powerlifting and everything that you do, where might they go?
So my website is nicole.pizza, and my terrible Twitter is just my name, Nicole He.
Amazing. Your Twitter is not terrible. You are an enormously funny person.
Oh, thank you so much.
Really enjoy your comedic efforts on Twitter.
Thank you.
You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found. And if you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. And you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and all the social medias at FemFreak. The show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support. Artwork by Jamie Varon. And our intro music is by Phil Circus. Join us next week for another feminist dive into pop culture. Bye.
Later.
Bye.